welcome back to another episode of the Be Who You Came to Be podcast. I'm your host, Tara Renze, and today I am so excited to have a fellow colleague, a fellow friend, Joel Goldberg, on the show today to talk about something that is absolutely essential to being who you came to be, which is grit and resilience. Joel has a new book coming out. Did it just come out this week?
It's out.
It's out. I'm going to pass the mic over to him, let him introduce himself, and talk just a little bit about who he is, who he came to be, and what he's up to.
Well, good to be with you, Tara, on the other side of things, since I've had you on my podcast. In the sports world, that's like what we would call a home and home. My place, your place. So I'm the visitor now. And so it's great to be here with you. And, the very short story of a long journey, we all have long journeys, is dreamed of being a television broadcaster in sports as a kid. That came true. I've been in it 30 years, still in it, last 18, broadcasting Kansas City Royals baseball, and got the incredible idea given to me to start a speaking business 8 years ago. I had no idea that such a thing existed. You did, but you made a pivot into that world, and it's the greatest world. So I'm living in both of these worlds, and when you speak, you tend to write a book. And I started a podcast first, went to the book, second, and then a second book now. And so I speak on culture, building trust, leadership, and I think every bit of building successful teams and building cultures involves grit and resilience.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about your Be Who You Came to Be story. So it was your childhood dream to be a sports broadcaster. Were you into sports as a kid? Did you play? Or were you more on the sidelines just figuring out how all the games work?
I should have been on the sidelines. I wasn't very good. I was really good in Little League and, youth soccer and those type of things. By the time I got to high school, I was the guy on the bench or maybe the backup. So in soccer mostly, but I never lost the dream. I think that the way I would answer this question is I'll give away just a little bit of the beginning of my Winning Trust keynote, where I will walk out and say, let me take you back to first grade class at South Valley Elementary School in Morristown, New Jersey, outside of Philadelphia, where my teacher, Mrs. Dunwoody, would call home complaining to my parents that I was disrupting class, giving the scores of last night's game once again. That legitimately happened. So those were the first signs of me wanting to do this. And I'll then say to the audience, what I knew back then was that I loved sports, to play them, to talk about them, that my dream was going to be on TV. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was what it takes to be a part of successful teams, what it would take for the teams that I cover to be successful. How do you build a team? How do you build trust? How do you build a strong culture? And that's what I have figured out. And there's no one size fits all. It's different for every group, but I've come to understand that. And so part of the grit and the resilience and my journey, what I came to be, what I wanted to be, was the guy on TV getting paid to talk about sports, because how cool is that? What I didn't understand, what I ultimately became, was a storyteller who understood the grit and the resilience piece to this, and the guy that got to tell all those stories. And little did I realize that would be not just on TV, but to audiences, to podcast audiences, and on and on. So there's so many layers to this.
Yeah. So most of us here in Kansas City know you as the voice of the Royals. We've been listening to you for years and years. How did that come about? And was it baseball that you always wanted to commentate?
Yeah, I don't know if I knew what I wanted to commentate. I mean, I think that, I would tell young kids now, commentate on everything, and nothing is too small because it gives you experience. And who knows, maybe you end up being the top wrestling announcer out there or the top swimming commentator. And, we tend to, at least in my industry and probably a lot, gravitate towards the big sports, which certainly in the United States would be, football, baseball, basketball, hockey, soccer. And so if I were to tell myself back then, you're going to end up in one of those sports, I would have been thrilled with any of them. I just wanted to get in and do it. If I would tell myself 30 years down the road, you're going to be doing 99% baseball, 150, 160 games a year, I would have said, yes, sign me up for it. So I've always kind of joked that my favorite sport to cover is the one that I'm in. And that's not because it pays the bills. Sure, that helps. It's because if you can't enjoy it and be knee deep in it, like, go get a real job. And so to me, it's like, it's such a privilege to get to do this. But I've found my lane. I did a lot of hockey for years too, and I love the hockey guys. They're great down-to-earth athletes. But I just, if you do something long enough, I understand the rhythm of baseball. I understand the daily grind of it. I understand the pressures of these athletes, even though I'm never going to step in the batter's box and attempt to even hit a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, let alone be able to see it. But I understand the pressures that they're under. And so it's been the greatest. Like, it's, but little did I realize that there'd be so many lessons learned in baseball that translate to the real world. And that's how I've met you. That's how I've met so many people. That's how I end up on stages around the country and around the world because of those experiences. And so that's the whole thing, about, who are we? Who are you supposed to be? It's a never ending journey. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say you're never going to arrive and be like, this is it. I'm sure that, you're with the Kansas City Royals now, and you're not like, this is where I'm going to be for the rest of my life. Although we can't imagine you any other place.
Well, what's an interesting development to that, though, Tara, is that, and I appreciate that. And, I tell people all the time that I'll do this until they want someone else to do it or until I can't do it. And that could be in a year, that could be in 10 years. I don't know. I don't need to know. That used to scare me a lot more. I'm not saying that it doesn't scare me. The television landscape is changing. You never know where you're going to be. But I've been in the same place for 17, now into an 18th season. And so can I envision doing anything else? I really would have no interest in going to another team or another city. Would I, if I had to? Maybe, but really more likely than not, whenever this ends, I'll just speak full time, and I'll be very happy to do that. But in an ideal world, I'm doing both of them because that gives me, look, what I do is no different than what you do. What I do on TV is no different than what you do on stage. We're storytellers, we're inspiring people, we're informing people. Yes, the medium is a little bit different. TV's different than most people's jobs. It's still about people in the end. And I love the fact that I have access to people in the baseball world that not everyone does, whether that be connecting fans to them or whether that be connecting my audiences when I speak to them. I love that I have access to these people that most don't. And then I love at the same time that I have access to people like you, to people that are in the C-suite, in the business world, and influencers like that. And then how do we tie it all together to help people? So that's a development that I never expected in my career, and I hope to continue to do it for a long time. It's so much fun.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, let's start talking a little bit, diving into this grit and resilience, as I know it is the theme of your newest book that's out. And, it shouldn't really be any surprise, especially when I think about baseball. I mean, just so you know, I'm a baseball parent, and I think just to be a parent, you need grit and resilience.
Yes, totally.
It's so many games and so many weekends, and, a baseball game can be going one way, and then all of a sudden it goes the other. And certainly you've been in this now for 18 years. And tell us about how you landed on grit and resilience and how you saw this showing up in the most resilient athletes and competitors in the game.
Yeah, I sort of landed on it. I definitely did not land on it accidentally, but I don't know that I could have laid it out the way you just did. I didn't have the answers. All I knew is this, and I'll back up that when I moved to Kansas City, I think you asked before how I got this job, and I climbed the ranks. I mean, you start small, and it's no different than a speaker who maybe starts doing really low dollar or even free speeches, and
right.
You're less worried about the money. There's the grit and resilience, by the way. Without realizing it, well, I knew it, but I hadn't thought about it in these terms. My story is one of grit and resilience too, because I like to say all the time that when I graduated from college, University of Wisconsin in Madison, 1994, it's a long time ago, and email's just starting. Internet is brand new. The way to connect with people is not what we know it is today. But let's just say that 10,000 people coming out of college that year wanted to be on TV, and there were only 50 openings. Right. I'm making up those numbers. Whatever they were, it was like winning the lottery. I was not better than anyone else. So how do you increase your odds of winning the lottery? And when I got rejected from 25 TV stations by sending a resume tape in the mail because we didn't have, YouTube links, and
Oh, you got
we
the old
didn't.
VHS?
And it was those tapes were called 3/4 inch and then beta tapes, which was TV. But I mean, it'd be like the equivalent of a VHS or an 8-track in audio. Nowadays you would send a YouTube link. But what I will tell a young audience, whether they be aspiring broadcasters or any profession, is great. You can send a YouTube link now and send a message through LinkedIn. So can everyone else.
Right.
What makes you different, knowing that there are others that are doing the same thing? And so what I did, which ultimately got me to Kansas City, because it started the ball rolling, was that I started cold calling TV stations. I'd have to look up the information because we didn't have it on the internet. And I would reach out to these news directors and say, I'm passing through town next week or in 2 weeks. I'd tell them who I was. I know you don't have any openings. I'm passing through town in 2 weeks. Would you be around on Tuesday or Wednesday if I popped in to shake your hand and hand deliver a tape? And if they said yes, I'd say what time. I was never going to any of those towns until they told me yes.
Yes, this is a classic sales 101.
Yes.
I used to train my sales reps in the corporate world to do this, to get appointments, be like, hey, I'm already going to be in the area.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous because I'm a terrible salesman. I don't like selling myself, but at that point, my dream was on the line, and I'd had this dream pretty much my whole life, and suddenly the doors were closing on me. So the grit and resilience was born there. That took me to the next market. I mean, small. We're talking about. Let's put it to you this way: like, we're talking about my annual salary was like the type of salary that you would turn down if somebody paid you to do one speech now. And I'm not getting into numbers. I'm just saying, like, we all start somewhere, and we're all grateful for where we're at now. But it was barely enough to live on, and I didn't care because I had my foot in the door. And eventually, when I was in St. Louis, my third stop, I then had an opportunity to come to Kansas City. The trade-off was going to be that I was giving up a salaried year-round job for working 6 months a year, independent contractor, no benefits, paid by the game, but you're going to make a year's worth of money in 6 months. Go do what you want with the other 6 months. And I didn't figure it out for about almost 9-10 years. And that's when the speaking thing came up on a suggestion from a friend. And that's when I figured out that I wanted to do all of this. And so that's how I got here. And then I came to understand that in doing these games every day, so I'm the pre and post game show host, I'm the in-game reporter, which means I talk to the star of the game after every game and, get the big splash coming in, the Gatorade bucket, that I so often would hear some form of this version after a big moment. This is what I dreamed of when I was growing up. This is what I dreamed of in the backyard when I was simulating Game 7 of the World Series. And I was like, that's interesting because my first book, Small Ball, Big Results, when that finished, my business coach at the time, a man named Mark LeBlanc, who's pretty big in the speaking world, said, I got the title for your next book. It's Small Ball, Big Dreams. And my first response was, can I breathe for a minute before we start that one? Right. And my second response was, oh my gosh, my dream of talking about sports really has turned into talking about other people's dreams. And what do those dreams consist of? Generally grit and resilience. And that's when it dawned on me, I could write a book about grit and resilience.
Yeah. So this is so interesting because I talk about in my keynote, I call them butterfly goals, which are these like wildly audacious goals. We know the butterfly starts as a caterpillar, like this big, fat, nasty, big bug, hairy, whatever it might be. And it becomes this beautiful butterfly. Well, I had some feedback recently. This is pretty interesting. And they said, well, this is kind of a feminine story that, the butterfly goal. So I was asking my son, I said, so what would be like the flip side of that? Like, what would be like the masculine butterfly goal? And he actually said, he's like, it's the major league dream. It's like every kid that is loved sports, they all have this dream for themselves of, whether it is they want to be a D1 basketball player and go to the NBA, they have the major league dream of becoming a major league baseball player. And the kids that actually do it, it's, yes, obviously they have the talent there, but that talent undeveloped means nothing. And that talent without the grit and resilience to become that is nothing. And so I loved that. I was like, it is kind of like the boy version of the butterfly goal of like, hey, if you want that, you're going to have to go after it, but it doesn't just happen overnight. It takes as long as it takes, and it's going to require grit and resilience and believing in yourself beyond reason for that to ever happen.
I mean, I can't really think of anyone in sports and sports is better than business, because you could have some situations of a family business, and doesn't mean they didn't work hard. By the way, they could have inherited a massive amount and worked as hard, if not harder, than their mom or their dad or whatever. Right. But none of that gets you. All of that can get you in the door in sports. It might get you an extra look. It might, as a favor, get you a tryout. It might even get you a spot. I mean, look at the Lakers, and LeBron James' son is now in the Lakers, but he doesn't play much, or he's up and down, and I don't follow it enough. But just because he's LeBron's son doesn't mean that he is going to be guaranteed playing time. So you could have the name, but you still got to go earn it. If you have absurd talent, let's talk about Patrick Mahomes. Let's talk about LeBron James, or the late Kobe Bryant, or Michael Jordan, or Wayne Gretzky, or and now with the Royals, Bobby Witt Jr.
Right.
Okay. I shouldn't say their name based on family. I mean, Bobby Witt Jr.'s dad did play, but their reputation of their name just based on their talent level may get them a big signing bonus. But then so maybe the door is open more wide for them. They always say, like in football, if you're a top draft pick, you're going to get more reps in practice. You're going to get more opportunity to fail. You're going to get a longer leash, because, look, if in Royals terms, if Bobby Witt Jr. is failing, well, we gave him a $7-8 million bonus. We need to give that more time versus the guy that had a $10,000 bonus, and you can move on to the next one and the next one. So most everyone, except for the outliers like the Bobby Witt Jr.'s and the Kobe Bryants and the Michael Jordans and the Wayne Gretzky's, they have to have grit, because their talent isn't that much better than everyone else's, right? The outliers, the Michael Jordans of the world, for them, the question of what makes you different, their talent, because they are the lottery pick. They're one of a kind. But here's the thing: the Kobe Bryants, the Michael Jordans, look in the music world, the greatest superstars, whatever the profession, they also work harder than anyone else. The beauty of the Kansas City Royals is that no one is going to outwork their two best players, Salvador Perez and Bobby Witt Jr. If those guys weren't hard workers, had bad attitudes and all of that, yes, they'd still probably be all-stars. But they're potential Hall of Famers because they put the two together. Most of us do not have Bobby Witt Jr., Patrick Mahomes, Michael Jordan, LeBron James level talent. We have to get the grit and resilience piece right. It is the common thread and bond from every successful person that I talk to.
Yeah, it is. And, it's about showing up and putting in the reps. And I think so much of it is just that, not quitting and giving up. And as you know, from being on your show and just you following me, that I am an emotional intelligence practitioner. And I think so much of grit and resilience is mental fitness. It's believing in ourselves beyond reason and not letting ourselves sabotage what we want to do because we tell ourselves, I'm not good enough. I'm never going to make it. I can't do this. Someone else is better than me. All those negative thoughts that we have that really hold us back. So talk to us a little bit about, the mental fitness of emotional intelligence and resilience and how you've seen that show up with athletes. I think about like Michael Jordan, right? His famous quote of like, you miss all the shots you don't take. Perfect example of, you're not going to make them all, but you're never going to make them if you don't go after them. And so it's just these little small mind hacks that we have to play with ourselves.
And I think, Tara, that the only way you get there, look, some people are so mentally strong and wired from day one, but again, I think they're the outliers. Michael Jordan may have been that way. I know some athletes that are that way, but for most, and us too, let's put it into real people jobs. I think that ability to handle those moments only happens over time with repetition. You talked about repetition. I like to call it in baseball terms batting practice. So when people will say to me, and they're just innocently asking a question, do you get nervous when you go on TV? And my sincere answer is no, but do you get nervous when you walk into your office? Maybe occasionally for a big meeting. I know every speaker is different. Some get nervous getting on stage, some don't. I'll hear some speakers say, well, if you don't get nervous, then you're not feeling it. I don't subscribe to that either. We're all wired differently. I know speakers and broadcasters that need to pace up and down and rehearse every word. That would make me nervous. It wouldn't work for me. But part of what happens with the repetition when you do it over and over again, and this is why I tell young broadcasters, do everything. Don't focus so much on the result. Focus on just getting comfortable with it. And so no matter what your profession is, the more you do it over and over again, the more you build up those calluses of how to handle failure and how to handle situations that weren't what you expected. So the reason why I never get nervous on TV is because it's not because I've experienced every situation, but I've experienced most of them over and over and over again. And so it's muscle memory for me at this point. It's not that I'm better than everybody else. It's that I've done it so much that I'm comfortable. And if you do something long enough, it generally means a couple of things. One, it means that you stayed around long enough and didn't wear out your welcome. So you didn't piss people off along the ways, and they liked your work enough. Again, if you're going to upset people along the way, you better be really, really good where they have to live with you. And then in doing that, the longer they let you stay, the more experience you get. And so when I look at the best baseball players in terms of mindset, they're the ones that can manage failure. Because baseball, more than any other sport, and you know this as the mother of baseball players, as a boy mom, you know that sport more than any other involves striking out, walking back with your head down after a disappointing moment where you're on center stage and it's you versus him. It's you versus her, and all the eyes are on you.
Yeah.
How can you not?
It is the game of failure.
And how can you not? First off, and I tell all my audiences, I do not recommend to you that you measure yourself as being successful if you're failing 70% of the time. But the best baseball players in terms of hitters are the ones that are successful 30% of the time. And that's a good number to have, which means that they know how to handle failure 70% of the time. And if you can learn to handle failure like the best baseball players do, not as often as they do, but with the way that they do it, you're going to be successful. And so there are a million examples I can give you, but I'll give you this one. I haven't told it a ton, but I actually need to work it into more speeches because it's such a beautiful story. Salvador Perez, this past baseball season, maybe June of 2024, we're down in Texas. It was one of their worst weekends of the year, one of their worst series of the year. They got swept. They had a great year, but this was a bad weekend. And I get on the team bus afterwards. Paint a picture here. There's usually 3 buses after a game. They're staggered so that the guys that are ready to go right away, they can leave. The guys that are getting a little treatment, they leave after. And then the rest of the training staff and whoever's lingering behind is the 3rd bus back to the hotel. I'm on bus 2, not because I was getting any training, but because, we all lean back a little bit, make sure the players and some of their families that are there get on the 1st bus, don't take a spot for them. It's really set for them, not us. So I'm on the 2nd bus. I also know, again, this is all about repetition too. Like, don't make unforced errors that put you in a bad light with the people that you're working with every single day and these superstars. I know getting on bus 2 that there are a lot of open seats, but the front row, there's a good chance that it's going to be for someone like the manager or the star player. Well, Salvador Perez gets on and sits right in the front row. I wasn't taking his seat. I've got a great relationship with him, but I know better than that. It's a respect factor. So I'm talking to my son back at home. I'm in the 2nd row, and I see Salvi get on, and I say, hey, let me call you back. I don't want to be loud. They just lost again. I want to be respectful here. So I hang up. Again, knowing my place. That's a bad way to say it. I know what works and what doesn't.
Right.
And so I'm just being respectful. I put my AirPods in. I'm going to listen to some music. Bus is quiet. Bad game. I'm not the end of the world, but the mood is a little down. And I'm minding my own business as the bus pulls out of the stadium, and Salvi turns around and he starts poking me. Joel. So I pull out my AirPods and I go, what's up? He goes, he had gone 0 for 4 and struck out all 4 times that night. Doesn't really get much worse than that.
Right.
And he goes, Joel, with a big smile on his face, when's the last time I struck out 4 times in a game? And I go, I was trying to avoid that discussion. He goes, why? It's just a game. I get to play again tomorrow. What's the big deal? And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty powerful. Hold on, let me look it up. I know how to do these things. Well, actually, a few years ago, you went 0 for 5 and struck out 5 times against the White Sox. Oh, yeah, I remember that one. Okay, thanks. And we started talking about something else. Well, I kind of out of the corner of my eye see a young center fielder by the name of Kyle Isbell, who's sitting across the way with his wife and toddler, infant son. And I kind of see his ears perking up. And a couple weeks later, I say to Kyle Isbell, hey, Izzy, did you hear Salvi on the bus with me back in Texas? Oh, yeah, I heard that. I can't figure out if he was doing that to make sure that I could tell that everything was fine so that I saw the confidence in the team. Maybe I reported. I don't know. There's no panic. Or was it for you being a young guy? And he goes, I don't know. Maybe it was for both of us. And it just dawned on me in that moment that this is a guy that not only knows how to handle failure, but that knows how to teach on it and show others the right way to do things. That right there is the ability to say, okay, it's over, time to move on. And that'll stick with me forever.
Yeah. It's so true. And I think baseball specifically, it is hard because even when you're winning, you're losing by the stats, right? 30% is great. But above and beyond that, as we all know, there's these major slumps that these guys go through where they can't get anything going game after game. And, I think that we all have these slumps. And I think this is when we get imposter syndrome, when we think like, who am I? Why did I think I could do this? We get into these slumps and for me, I practice what I preach and I try to remain mentally fit. But when business gets slow or things don't go the way I want them to, that is where the mental fitness really comes in, of not talking myself, out of greatness and thinking and letting myself get so mentally mind flipped that I make it worse for myself. But I think so many times when we're in these slumps, that so much of it is about something changing or growing within us. And I remind myself that it's like everything, this is all happening for a reason, because we have to dial in on something or we have to think more about something. And natural progression is not just an uphill climb. It's always up, down, good game. Everyone has a bad game. And this whole notion of resilience, I think, can get really tested, though, when things don't go our way for a while. Can you think of a story or an athlete who really had to go through a lot to persevere, whether it was an injury or just not making it happen?
I mean, they happen all the time. And I think the first thing I would say, I'll speak generally on this, is that the reason why April in baseball is so important, the first month of the season, and then the reason why I tried to put it into a different context is if you go 0 for 20 in April to start, that's all you have to show. Like, you're going to have a bad stretch in June or August or whenever it might be.
Right.
And it mixes in with everything else you've had.
Right.
But if you start poorly in April, and let's just say that you're hitting 143 in April, which is not the end of the world, but that means you've been successful about 14% of the time. Remember that a good player is going to be closer to 30%, batting 300. If you go, whatever it is, 143 batting average just in June alone, it also has attached to it all the stats in April and May. But when you start off like that in April, and you're looking up at the board and you're looking up at your numbers, it's human nature to say, okay, if I do this and I have this many hits and I do this over and over again and I do this, then I could get myself back to where I go, versus just what do I need to do today? So there's a lot of temptation there. As you were asking me the question, I quickly flipped open my book because there's a great answer about this from a former big leaguer, former all-star and world champion by the name of Kevin Youkilis, who was most known for playing for the Boston Red Sox, played a little for the Yankees and White Sox too. He now owns a brewery in the San Jose area, and so he's a business owner. And he said to me, I'm going to read this quote, 'cause it's what I thought of it as you said it. I call it the ocean waves versus the lake waves. Do you want lake waves or ocean waves as a season? I want the small waves as much as possible. I want the pond effect, and it's no different in business too. When you start getting that roller coaster ride, the days get longer, the job gets harder, and you just have to stick within what you're doing and figure out little things each day that can put you in a better spot for tomorrow. And so he's saying, like, I can't change the numbers in the P&L. I can't change where things are at overnight. And that's what it is for a baseball player too. That's what it's like for players that suddenly are on the right track and they get hurt. And we see it every year in baseball. If you get diagnosed with a torn UCL, ulnar collateral ligament in your elbow, and you're a pitcher, you're probably going to miss minimum 9, if not 12 months. And so we see that one all the time. Cole Reagans is the Royals' star pitcher. They traded for him 2 years ago. He very quickly became their ace, their opening day starter. He is phenomenal. He's already had 2 Tommy John surgeries. And so by the time the Royals got him, he had dealt with 2 years worth of failure. And then the fear of getting back out there, and is it going to work? And what if I hurt myself again? These guys are human beings just like the rest of us. Or I remember being told, I'm not going to say the name, but I remember being told about a streaky player at one point. I said, boy, he looks really good right now. And the hitting coach said, this is like the ocean waves, lake waves again. He said, he's really good right now, but he also can get really out of whack with the way his swing and the mechanics are. We need to avoid those big swings. We need to avoid the extreme highs and lows. And see that one every single day. What people don't see behind the scenes is that these guys are working for hours before the game, sometimes even after the game, to try to figure out what's wrong with the swing, what's wrong with the pitching mechanics. And that's the piece of it that is maddening, because then human nature takes over and you're like, oh my gosh, I got to salvage this season. If I could just have X amount of hits, if I could just do that. And no matter what they say, it's in their head, most of them, versus saying, you know what, forget about the darn numbers. And let's just have a good day today. Right. And then let's see if we can have a good day tomorrow. And there are going to be bad days mixed in there. That's really hard to do.
It is. And I think that, I know for me, the more I push, the more resistance I get. The more that I try harder and harder, sometimes you make it worse for yourself. And I know I'm not an athlete, but I have 2 sons that are. And so many times when they're in a slump, or we talk a lot about visualization and just letting your body do the work, letting your body do what it's supposed to do, because sometimes the mind is so powerful that it can mess up the logistics of how everything else works. And I remember when I was growing up, I was a musician, but there was this, maybe you've heard of this before. It was called the inner game of golf. And then it was the inner game of tennis. And then this author went on to write the inner game of music, the inner game of everything, because it was that. Even as a musician playing a solo, I knew the music, it was in my head, it was in my heart. But if I started overthinking it with my mind, it wouldn't happen. And so, I remind my boys this so much, that there is an inner game. And I think that's where, this grit and resilience comes in, because sometimes the more you push versus just letting what's natural happens and letting your gifts and talents go, we create barriers, mental barriers, that make it impossible for us to physically show up.
And I think that there's something to be said about this. I'll get back to repetition again. When you do it long enough, you just trust that it's all going to work out. And not in a woo-woo way like, all right, whatever happens, happens. It's just in a way that I think removes the fear of worst case scenario from your mind. Like, I guess worst case scenario for me, I'll give you this example, Tara. I've had people, and this, I feel comfortable talking about this without it being political, because I like to stay out of all that. And that serves me well, by the way. Like for someone that's in a higher profile world.
Right.
Like I live in this world where everybody sees what I do, but I try to fly under the radar all at the same time. It's like, funny to say that as a guy that's pounding my chest to get people to buy a new book. But let's get back to ocean waves versus lake waves. I don't want to make ocean waves with what I do. Some do, right? The shock jock or whatever you want to call them, that is trying to get these big ratings, or someone that's trying to go viral. They've got to go big, right? And you talked about, sometimes you hold yourself back. Yes. But I also know and trust myself to do what I need to do. And so the politics part of it, or the non-politics part of it, is I've had some friends that have said to me, in recent years, boy, you can get fired for anything by saying the wrong thing now. Like, doesn't that worry you when you go on the air? And I say never, because I trust myself to say the right thing. Doesn't mean I'm right every time. Doesn't mean that I don't make mistakes every day. It's live television. I get that. But the 2 points to that are, one, the mistakes that I make on live TV that used to eat me up and drive me nuts before, I just fully understand are a part of the game. And there's a pretty good chance that within 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour later, or even a minute later, I don't even remember what I did. If it keeps me up at night, or if I'm upset about it after I'm walking off a show, it was a bigger deal. But start with this. I don't believe I'm ever going to say anything on the air that is going to get me in trouble or big trouble. A bad word, something that would be offensive. So when people say, don't you worry that if you say the wrong thing, I know what the right and wrong thing is.
Right.
And so if I trust myself to do that, then I'm not living in fear of it. And if you can't trust yourself to do that, then either you don't know right from wrong. Like, look at it like when your kids were growing up. You got two boys here. There was a point in their sports careers where you probably had to have the talk about, we really shouldn't use that language, and that's not appropriate, until you realize they're using that language. They're in locker rooms, like,
Right.
My son played hockey. I'm not gonna be able to prevent him from hearing what he does. It might explain some of the language that goes on for all of us in my house now. But I know how to not bring that language onto TV. When the kids were really young, right, Tara? Maybe you had the swear jar or whatever it was. And it's not like those words weren't a part of, who doesn't have that story of driving their, young little toddler in the car, and, little Jimmy says the word they shouldn't. You're like, where did you get that from? And you're like, oh my gosh, I think they heard that from me or from
They're like,
dad or
Dad,
from whatever.
Dad said that.
Right, Dad said it. Dad said it. Of course, we've all been there, and we understand. We understand that piece of it. But you also know how, when they were little kids, to not say it, and
Right.
that's all it is. For me, is like, if you know what the worst case scenario is, take Salvador Perez. Okay, worst case scenario, I strike out. We lose the game. I've got a beautiful family. I've had a great life. I grew up, poor, with an amazing mom and grandmother, and I have all of this now. What's the worst that could happen to me? Come on. And so it's a mindset. And so I don't ever go on the air. I don't ever get up on stage paralyzed by my fears, because I trust that it's going to work out. So that's the point. It's not a woo-woo, like, oh, whatever happens, happens. It's, no, I know how to not guarantee success, but I think I know how to avoid the worst of failure.
Right. Well, it's because you're a pro. And that's what, these athletes who can face adversity and all that, they're pros. I mean, they know they're going to have to keep showing up and keep doing it. I'm very similar in the same way. I always, and I'll tell people, like, do you get nervous? Do you have a script? And I actually don't have a script for my keynotes. I watch a lot of film. I take notes. I write down things that I want to make sure I remember to say. But, and people are like, well, how do you know if you're prepared? And I'm like, well, I'm a pro. Like, I know what I need to do and how I'm going to show up. And I also know that all those words and everything I want is inside of me, and it doesn't have to be too programmed. And again, when I start pushing, when I start to become too rehearsed or too whatever, then it doesn't land, because you don't make, that connection. But let's take a couple more things.
I just want to jump in real quick.
Yeah.
Because I'm so passionate about that. You and I are on the same page with that. And by the way, this isn't just, if you're a speaker, I hope this helps. But if you're whatever you do, I hope this helps. For Tara and I don't know that we had ever talked about that before. Our styles are similar in the comfort level, or maybe the desire not to have a script. Like, I'm better off without a script. I am better off being able to trust what's going on in my head, having a blueprint. I hate the term winging it, because I don't ever wing it.
Yeah, me either.
But I also can't guarantee you that what we talked about me saying in advance, I'm going to hit everything you want, but If you say, hey, here's an idea, and I'm like, oh, that's a great one. I may not remember it. I may not get to it. My mind might go elsewhere, but that works for me and you. And it may not work for, like, there's someone listening that might be like, but I have to rehearse and I don't think I could do it that way. Great. Then do it your way.
Right.
I'm not saying that rehearsing or doing all of that or having a script is a bad thing. It's a bad thing for me. And I think one of the sweet spots that we get into with repetition and with doing this over and over again and what builds grit and resilience is figuring out what works for you. And once you do that, then you try to master that, and you start to eliminate over time what doesn't work for you, which oftentimes is what people suggest you should do. Say, wait a minute, you know what? That's great. Might work for you, but it doesn't work for me.
Yeah, agreed. I know for me, I love rehearsing, quote unquote, or talking. Like, I'll go get on a treadmill and I'll talk out loud for 40 minutes because my body's moving, my mind can move, and I like that. But I do think you're so right. Like, what you got to figure out what works for you. So let's shift here and talk about the role that grit and resilience plays in teams, because, we've talked about, it is the secret sauce to being who you came to be. This notion that you're never going to arrive and then just be great for the rest of your life. It's always about an up level, which to usually get through an up level, there's some sort of adversity or a challenge that we work through to get to where we're at, which requires that grit and resilience. But what role does this play in teams? Because all it takes is one. We've seen this time after time with, just even watching my boys play sports, of the one bad attitude on the team, the one kid who can screw it up for everyone, the one kid who, just can sour it for everyone. And sometimes it's not even been the kid, it's been the coach, or it's been a parent in the stands who's just constantly, where you're like, look, stop. So talk about the role that that resilience and grit plays in the greatness of teams, because obviously, unless you're running track and field, it's a team sport.
Yeah. For the most part, that's true. And even track and field, even golf or swimming or tennis, they've got generally a trainer, a coach, a business person,
Right.
There still are teams, even if there's only one performer. And so I think that it's such a cliche thing to say, but it's everyone pulling in the right direction. And when you have that person that's not, it really can bring you down. And, I think that's a really hard thing to do at a younger level, where oftentimes everybody is involved. And, if it's the lowest level of little league type of sports, hey, everybody's involved. Now you start getting into travel sports and it gets more complicated, because you mentioned it before, the parents are getting involved. The stakes are higher, too high, by the way, in my opinion. And now it's not a matter of having that kid that just, everybody's got to play. It's, I got to take this kid because he's better than everybody else, but maybe he's a bad egg. And so you got to figure out that. I think managing youth sports and travel ball is one of the hardest things to do, and it's one of the reasons why this generation of athletes coming up has to be coached differently, because they've all, to some extent, and I don't say this in a negative way, it's just where we're at, they've all been entitled in different ways because they've been catered to. And that's just, so you have to know how to coach those kids. I think that, I don't know if I have a great overall answer other than to say that when your top players are also the hardest workers and the grittiest, then that sends a message to everyone else. So in the case of the Kansas City Royals, nobody works harder than Bobby Witt Jr. and Salvador Perez. So now look at the dynamic of a 26-person team, and probably your two most important positions on the field, shortstop and catcher, are your two best, hardest working guys. And I say most important, shortstop is generally the most important infielder. Catcher is the signal caller. He's your quarterback. If you needed to add in a center fielder, those are the guys that are in the middle of a lot because they're in the middle of the field. The two hardest working people on the Royals are the two best players. And oh, by the way, one is 34 and Venezuelan, who speaks Spanish as his first language and is idolized by the young Latin American players. And the other one is 24 years old and is a yes sir, no sir guy that treats everybody fairly and is more quiet than Salvador Perez, that's Bobby Witt Jr., but is a lead by example guy that is willing to speak up if he needs to. So you now have these two guys doing it in different ways that are leading the charge. It's really hard to not fall in line with that. And if you don't, most of the rest of that team is going to gather and rally around those superstars who are showing the right way to do it. So it has to start at the top with your best players. It has to start in any business with your leaders. And if they're willing to do it, I love when I see leaders that, after an event that I do, seem to be helping cleaning things up or seem to be knee deep in the middle of some work that somebody else could be doing or whatever it is. Those leaders that say, you know what, I'm willing to do what everybody is doing because it sets an example. That is the person that doesn't need to show the grit and resilience, showing everybody that they still have it. And I think it goes a long ways.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think that, and from a parenting standpoint, our kids see us and they mimic us and they follow our lead. And so I do think, the best leaders are skilled in being resilient, and how they lead teams during those difficult times, I think is also so critical, because if you have a leader who is not resilient or doesn't have that mental fortitude and toughness to keep going, and then give everyone on their team, they can believe in everyone else more than they believe in themselves, and they can believe for everyone else and give them that gift when people are down, because there's nothing worse than a leader who you feel like doesn't believe anymore or doesn't want to work anymore or doesn't, stand behind the cause. It'll derail everything in an organization.
I agree with every bit of it, and I think it has to include not just your players, so to speak. I'm talking in sports terms, but your star producers or whatever. It's got to come from the highest levels of management too. And so everybody has different managing styles. I'm not saying it's a one size fits all, but if you look at the Royals or the best managers that I've worked around, they are able to earn the respect of their top performers, and they are able to then, instead of micromanage, they're able to say, you know what, you guys handle it. And for the big stuff, I'll bring them into my office and say, hey, we need more grit from you. We need harder work. We need this. But for the most part, when you start to have for lack of a better term, a hierarchy that polices itself, now you as that leader don't need to micromanage, because I, as the manager, as Matt Quatrero, can trust that Salvador Perez and Bobby Witt Jr. will take care of it. And, when it's coming from your peers versus your bosses, sometimes it goes a lot further. So the good ones, teams, players, whatever, successful business people, this is all built into them. I mean, I think they all learn it, but they know how, like, regardless of the Chiefs coming off of the awful Super Bowl, they have all that built in. Like they have all of that ability to police themselves and do these things. Doesn't mean it's going to go right every single time. But Andy Reid trusts his people. Matt Quatrero trusts his people. That doesn't happen overnight.
Right. Well, I think that the Chiefs are a perfect example of, grit and resilience after that. It was a terrible showing at the Super Bowl. And, I think Pat Mahomes is just such a great guy. And he basically took the fall for the team. I don't know if you saw his tweet. It's like, I let everyone down. And this is, unfortunately, what sucks is it was the last game of the season. It was a Super Bowl game. It was the championship. And now he's got to get mentally fit enough to stay the course and keep going, because there are people who say, oh, he's washed. Oh, it was a fluke, which we all know is total bullshit. But again, the mental fortitude, resilience, and grit that it's going to take to come back and, turn that setback into a comeback, it's a lot. And now he's sitting on a down season where all he's got is time to think about he's replayed every freaking play that's already happened, and he'll continue to do that over and over and over and over. But he's the type of guy and the type of leader of the Chiefs organization I believe this will be a setback that has turned into a huge comeback, and will give them what they need to really take the team to the next level. Because, we had some issues this year just in general, I think, with the team, just like disconnection.
The best leaders, I'll put Patrick Mahomes in there. I don't spend any time around Patrick. I'll see him at the ballpark a little bit. I would not claim to know him. Just a high. But the Patrick Mahomes, the Salvador Perez's, they know how to handle it. And does that mean you're right? I mean, of course he's going to review those plays, the really bad ones, multiple times over and over again in his head. I don't feel sorry for him. I envy him, actually, not for the obvious reasons of the amount of money and success and all that, but I envy him because I believe, without fully knowing, that he is wired to handle this. That if they have that comeback, it'll be in part because he has the resilience we're talking about. If they never come back, then maybe it was just the end of the run. I don't think it's that. And as far as all the negative out there, the good ones know how to ignore it. And yes, there's still always human nature, but like, he shouldn't even be on social media, and he may not be. I mean, everything that gets posted may just be from his team. But even if he is on social media, as long as he's not reading those comments, you don't need to know all that stuff.
Right.
Or maybe it fuels him. I don't know. But I mean, any of us, like most people aren't in professions where everything they do is going to be dissected by the world. You know, that's sports, even to me, to a smaller extent, being on TV. But why would I go down the rabbit hole of what someone is critiquing me when they don't even know my business?
100%.
And so that's just a waste of energy. And it's tempting to want to go there, right? I want to know, what are people saying about my book? What do they think about that great broadcast? And for the most part, like I'll tell young athletes all the time, or I'll tell my wife, I'll say, if somebody's saying something bad about me, I don't care. Now, if they're saying someone that threatens the well-being of our family or our reputation, that can affect my job or you know, our standing in this community, then I want to know. But for the most part, don't tell me about all this stuff, because it's just it's a waste of energy for me.
Yeah. Well, I always say your opinion of me and my authenticity is none of my business. It has no impact on who I am and how I'm going to choose to show up. Well, we're going to wrap here in just a minute, but one of the things that I think is so important are just these small daily habits that we can build mental toughness and resilience. And one of the things for me has been this mental shift of reflecting on, you know, I call it using a clear mirror to self-assess. In my keynotes, I actually talk about how I used my kids' baseball games to teach them how to self-assess so they could become better. And it was really not about me being like, hey, here's everything you did great in the game, and here's where you need to work. But it was like, hey, think about, what did you do? What did you do that you thought was great? Where do you need to work? Where could you, amp up a few things that would change the trajectory of your success? And so for me, I try to just do this daily self-assessing of, what did I do well? Where do I need to work? Even from every keynote, it's not about rewatching the tape and being like, oh, this sucks, or I didn't like this, but it's really like, hey, what if I actually stood still for that sentence right there and really let that fall on the impact? So for me, these daily, the daily self-assessing and figuring out what I need to do different. Where did I do something that it wasn't a mistake? I think I said this when we were on your podcast, that my grandmother always said it's only a mistake if it happens twice. The first time was a lesson you needed to learn. And I think for me, allowing myself to go through that has given me so much mental fortitude, grit, and resilience, because I'm committed to getting better every day by learning what I need to do different versus trying to build myself up on what I did great all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And, going back to before, it is going to be different for everyone. And, some people need the structure to say, I have to do X amount of things per day, or I have to do this every day at this time, or I have to be. And some are going to say, like, for me, you might be able to pin me down on that for 3 or 4 days, and then I get bored and I got to try something else. And so the key, and again, the sweet spot is finding what works for you. Maybe it's daily meditation. Maybe it's whatever it is. Finding those things, and that younger generation is so good right now about mindfulness and being present. I mean, like the things that come out of their mouths now we never knew existed. Being grounded, walking where your feet are, being where your feet are, all this kind of stuff. We never talked like that, and I think that's actually a good thing. Like that. Do you have the ability to self-assess? Do you have the ability to check it out? And you're right, that's the only way you get better. And by the way, for the most part, people tell you what you want to hear. So, take it with a grain of salt. it's good to boost your confidence, but it's not the end all be all. Generally, people won't tell you what you need to work on, or if they do so, in my profession, it might be with, throwing a grenade your way via social media, and there's no real benefit in that one either. And so I just think it's a matter of, and being vulnerable too. Like, it's okay to admit what you don't know. If anything, I find it to be a great trust builder and connectivity tool is to ask people, hey, what are you seeing? How could I get better? I'd love your opinion. People like to feel like their opinions matter. Mm-hmm. And when you're genuine about it, like, who am I to say that I have all this figured out? Even the best of whatever profession doesn't have it all figured out. So I think it's, what you're saying, those little small things every day, what I call small ball, and constantly being curious. What else can I do? How can I better myself? How can I make life easier? How can I be more efficient with what I'm doing? What am I wasting my time on? How can it better be used with something else? Those are good lessons and good thoughts to have every day, as long as it doesn't paralyze you from doing what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, gosh, we're here at the close of the show, and now is where you get to tell everyone. I'm sure everyone right now, if they haven't already ordered the book, they've gotten online, they've figured out where to get it. They got to have more Joel Goldberg in their life. Tell us where they can get the book and where they can get a hold of you and all those good things.
Well, as is the case with probably most books, you can get it on Amazon. That's easy. Small Ball, Big Dreams. The first one, Small Ball, Big Results, you can get that one too. But if you're looking for the new one, Small Ball, Big Dreams, or my website, and it's a little more expensive that way, and I package it up and autograph it and all that. So if that's of interest, joelgoldbergmedia.com, and that's where all my speaking business and all that stuff, Tara, you know all about that and how that works. But I love this book just because it's just a lot of interesting, heartwarming, and unique stories about grit and resilience in baseball and business. I even have one with my mom in there, which is a fun little chapter as well about her journey. So
I love that.
Just good. And the way I try to write is for those of us with, I was going to say, like, for some of our athletes, I'm very much stereotyping here. There are pictures in there, but that's more, like a shot that I would take at my broadcast teammate Rex Hudler. I don't really mean it, but I try to write this thing with just, you could pick up any chapter. You could pick up chapter 2, chapter 12, whatever, if you just want a story. And so there's 14 stories in there with a bunch of other little stories mixed in within them. You could just pick one up and read it for 10 minutes and get a lot of inspiration.
I love that. That's how my book is too. Okay, before we go, we're on the heels of a amazing run for the Royals that we just had in 2024. So what are your predictions for the Royals in 2025?
I have no idea win total. All I will say is that they will be disappointed first and foremost if they don't win the division. And I always like to say this. I've never heard anyone in spring training, any year I've covered baseball, and I think I've covered Major League Baseball now for about 25 years. I've never heard anybody go to spring training and be like, boy, we're going to suck this year. Like, everybody still, even the worst teams are like, we got hope. But the worst of the teams that need everything to go right, and this got to figure it out, and this got to figure it out, and this got to figure it out, and this got to stay healthy, and maybe if we catch lightning in a bottle, and that rarely happens. But it also never goes as planned. What I know is that the Royals last year believed they could do what they did, but nobody else did. They're the first team in Major League Baseball history to go from 106 losses one year to the playoffs the next. But what I love is that they all will say, privately and publicly, that they were disappointed in last year. And I think most of us in the community, most fans would say, oh my gosh, like, we just went from one of the worst seasons in the history of baseball to the playoffs. Good enough for me. And their whole take was, we don't like the way it ended. We felt like we should have beat the Yankees in the playoffs. We're disappointed in that, and we expect more of ourselves. So what I do think is that they set the expectation last year that the playoffs are where they should be and that they need to be. And then let's see how far it goes. Once you get into the playoffs, anything is possible. You can't win a world championship in any sport if you don't make the playoffs. So that's the goal. But I think they didn't win the division last year. They were the wild card. I think that the first goal will be, along with staying healthy, of course, is to win the division and then see if they can improve on next year. And then I think bigger picture, they're going to want to win every year, of course. Set the expectation that you're supposed to be in the playoffs every year. Set the expectation from not just yourself internally, but fans locally, regionally, and just baseball fans in general, that, you know what, every year the Kansas City Royals are a playoff contender, and maybe on a down year you miss the playoffs, but no more 100-loss seasons, and try to set the bar there as the minimum is we miss the playoffs, not that we're a disaster. And that's a negative way to frame it, but I think the positive way to frame it is they expect to be relevant every year now, which is awesome.
Yeah. Well, let's go Royals. I'm excited for the season to start. And Joel, it's been such an honor to have you on the show.
Thanks.
I know that all my local fans and our Kansas City community here is going to love listening to this. And hopefully we've, shined some light on Kansas City and resilience. And we've maybe even picked up some new KC Royals fans with this episode. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks, Tara.
All right. Tune in again for another episode of Be Who You Came to Be. Until we meet again, keep shining, live unapologetically authentic, and be who you came to be.